what we wanted to do is to have Taiji Miyagawa come up here. He's a PANA member and been very active in housing issues. Now, I don't know if some of you know this, but in Little Tokyo, there's been housing issues. There's elderly artists who are evicted, 800 traction people, and obviously in Chinatown, actually there's a big victory in Chinatown over meta housing. So there's been a lot of struggles for housing here in our communities, and I know that we have someone from Filipino town too. So Taiji, do you want to look at?
So like people mentioned, I'm really honored to be here because it's the first time that I've shared a panel with other Asian community activists, and we're not going to be able to cover all the details about housing in 15 minutes, but we're going to go really fast, and I'm going to set the pace, talking really fast. So we're in Little Tokyo, so just to set a context, Japanese Americans are one of the most highly displaced oppressed people groups in the country. Here in Little Tokyo, the biggest one started in, next slide. I guess I'm going to have to keep doing this. World War II obviously was the incarceration where 120,000 of us had our constitutional rights violated. We got uprooted in our homes, facing conditions not dissimilar to the conditions that people are facing at the hands of ICE today. Next slide. People came back to Little Tokyo after the camps. The camps resulted in a 2/3 loss of the community that Little Tokyo never recovered from. It used to go all the way down to 9th Street, all the way east out to the river, north to Temple, west in Los Angeles. We could never recover from that. People came back to some degree, rebuilt the community from the 50s, but then going into the 60s, LA City started buying properties like the Parker Center. That used to be Little Tokyo, where the Aliso parking lot used to be the Parker Center, Dragnet for the older people, that TV show. That used to be part of Little Tokyo. And then in the 70s and 80s, the Japanese economy was doing the good. Corporations started moving money over here and colluded with the city to remove most of the low-income housing that we had where all the working people live. Next slide. So this is over on Weller Court. It's a big mall, a big hotel now. That building right there, the white one, that was a cultural community center, and that was what Dean told you was referencing earlier. We had a big fight around that, and as a result of the fight, we got some of the cultural and social service organizations over here. We got the American put in the JACCC name, because otherwise it was just going to be Japanese. And that's largely why we're able to meet here today. Next slide. So today, context moving today, this is kind of the third wave of displacement in Little Tokyo. All throughout LA, a lot of the gentrification going on is connected to Metro Rail. It's connected to transit development. And this is the station they're building on the southwest corner of Alameda and First Street. They're actually trying to bring a second line through Little Tokyo, and we're fighting with that. Next slide. So, nearby the metro station, only 3 blocks away in the Arts District. Arts District has already evicted 95% of the artists who moved there in the 80s and built the Arts District. This is a market rate project, only 2 blocks away from 800 Traction. Next slide. 800 Traction used to be an industrial, like most of the buildings in the Arts District. It wasn't rezoned. Even though people have been living there for 30 years, the archaic zoning laws of Los Angeles didn't designated as a residential space, so they weren't under rent control, even though it was an old building. So a big New York developer backed by Credit Suisse Bank came in and issued eviction notices. I think it was last May. Next slide. We had a campaign to kick it off. These artists had moved there in the 80s, and these were like community artists that moved into this building specifically to be part of Little Tokyo. So it's different than the rest of the Arts District, artists who were just looking for cheap spaces. These people were moving in Little Tokyo to work in Little Tokyo. You see some of their public art if you walk around Little Tokyo. And so that the component of this campaign was connected to the Little Tokyo history. They were the last Japanese American residents on the part of Little Tokyo east of Alameda. So this was a rally in June. Next slide. So we knew that we needed a broader alliance. It wasn't Japanese Americans who were not going to be enough to fight this fight. We had no legal protection So we try to broaden out with art shows, younger people, and petitions. Next slide. And we united with other artists. This is March from Little Tokyo to the Arts District. Next. One component of this fight that we tried to highlight, and this is happening in a lot of other neighborhoods, when we talk about housing, gentrification, displacement, we need to understand there's a white supremacist component to it. There's a cultural war going on. In Highland Park, they're literally whitewashing, painting over Chicano murals. It was the same thing here. The developer wanted to get a Cultural Heritage Commission designation of historical monument for the building, which would allow them to get massive tax credits for renovation. And in the process, in the language of that text, they were trying to eliminate Japanese American history from the 800 Traction building, even though we'd been there since before the war. Next. So we went to Weezar's office. We had to fight the Cultural Heritage Commission a couple of times. Next. And we had to go to City Council. We were able to get language that included Japanese in the language, so now it's part of the historical city record that Japanese Americans are part of the history of the building as well as other artists. Next. So pressing needs, stop whitewashing of our communities. We want to get creative workspace for community artists to address the loss of 800 Traction in Little Tokyo. We have some housing for elderly people, but we think that we should raise the demand for housing for young people and lower income people, housing that they can actually afford. We need nursing care, retirement for our aging population, and a big one that others will talk to is yes on Proposition 10 in November, so we can begin to expand rent control and outlay and change zoning laws. Next, final slide. And ideal world, I was asked, ideally we want federally public funded, safe quality housing to meet everyone's housing needs. Thank you. Next is Arturo.
Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm Arturo Garcia. My formal title is the National Coordinator for Justice for Filipino American Veterans. But I'm not here for the Filipino veterans. I'm here for historic Filipinitan. I would just like to point out two things. The misnomer or the double speak that the city government of Los Angeles is guilty of. Number one is affordable housing. They call it affordable housing, but people cannot afford. So why call it affordable housing? And their tactic is to build market rate housing. And in the market rate housing, they will, if it is 100 units, they will give 20% for the low income. There is no low income housing in Los Angeles. And that is the truth. So I accuse the city government of double speak. Affordable housing, but you cannot afford. What is that? Another thing is this homelessness. They are giving funds to the homeless. They give a lot of proposition to the homeless. But who are the real homeless? The real homeless are the renters. Would you agree with me?
Yeah.
We rent because we don't have homes. That's the irony of it. And because there is one thing called gentrification, they gentrify everything, the rent goes up. I want to speak more, but he gives me the yellow sign. But I will end up with this. There are three phases of gentrification. Number one is beautification. They beautify the area. They put a lot of signs, like in historic Philippine town, this and this, heritage district. So it will be good. When it is beautified, then they will call for civic participation. People should participate in these projects and this and that. And the last is infrastructure. I will end up in the infrastructure. For the last 15 years, there were 20 apartments that were built, but only one is affordable. And it is 50% for the homeless. So, where will the renters go? I will tell you what New York did. because there were lead contamination. New York destroyed blocks and blocks of houses, and they built cooperative houses for the poor. Why can't LA do that? I have been I've been an advocate of housing, so I went to the housing projects, and do you know that our apartments were built around 1800s or 1900s? It is lead contaminated, and people live in those houses. So the real people who have no homes are the renters. But because of gentrification, just like in a historic Filipino town, 20 apartments, all market rate, the lowest rate is 1,950 for what we call studio. How can we pay that goddamn thing? And they call historic Filipino town the design district. Our candidate, Kenneth Mejia, will talk about it, and I will end you with this. The real homeless are the renters, and they increase the rent because of this gentrification in historic Filipino town. That's why we in the Justice for Filipino Veterans, we, as a second Vice President of the Filipino-American Community of Los Angeles, we have promised we will fight this gentrification through the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arturo. I'm glad Arturo made some of the link between the homeless situation and rents, and on that basis, I'm happy to introduce Jane Winton. She's heads up the Shelter for All Koreatown organization. Most of you have heard that, you know, the voters in LA, #1 issue when a poll was taken a few years ago in LA was homelessness, right? And they voted for HHS to allocate more resources from the county for construction of shelters, as well as Measure H, which are more services. Now we have this problem where the money's there, and the city council wants to build these facilities, but NIMBY has risen its ugly head in every neighborhood. San Pedro, down in Irvine it happened, and also in Koreatown, and Jane's been involved with that. She has on the ground experience with this homeless situation, organizing regular outreach work on the sidewalks and streets of Koreatown, and she can talk about it.
Thank you. Is this working? Cool. Hi, thanks for having me. I'm pretty new to this whole activism thing. It wasn't ever my intention to get involved in local politics. I literally got started 4 months ago, to the day actually. And I got involved in this because the city proposed to put a homeless shelter in Koreatown. And there were large protests that erupted. A lot of community members were against it. They were afraid of a homeless shelter destroying their community. At the very first protest, there was only one counter-protester. His name was Johnny Lee. And when I found out about that, I was so inspired. I wanted to join him. So the next week, I organized a counter-protest. And I organized it in one day. So it was pretty pathetic. There were 200 people protesting the homeless shelter, and there were 8 of us. So yeah, it was pretty bad. But that day, when we met on the streets, we decided to keep fighting, and we've been organizing and fighting for homeless people and low-income tenants in Koreatown ever since. So our name, Shelter for All Koreatown, is very reactive. And throughout the months, throughout the summer, there have been these escalating protests. We got like 70 to 100 people show up at a protest, and we thought we were doing great, but they went a lot bigger. There were, they spent tens of thousands of dollars to oppose the homeless shelter. And during this whole time, the homeless voices were absent, people on the streets. So we organized weekly outreach. We go out and we give people hygiene supplies, food, and water. And the intention is to get to know them and to find out what they want, what they need. We've also been doing educational workshops and holding a street watch training so that we can be there when LAPD and sanitation come to sweep away homeless people. So we're very aware that criminalization of homelessness is a real problem. Okay, so the demographics of Koreatown is that it's 54% Latino, 30% Asian, 60% foreign-born. The median annual income is around $30,000, and renters occupy 93% of the housing units. So it's mostly renters and pretty low income. But at the same time, there's massive development that's happening. So we know that 5% increase in rent will lead to 2,000 homeless people. And I have the red sign, so I have to wrap this up. We have to keep fighting. There's so much opposition, so much NIMBYism, and the only way to overcome it is by organizing, getting involved. Even if it's just you on the street with a sign, you will make a difference. Thank you.
Sorry, last but not least, we have Kenny Chan from Chinatown Community for Equitable Development. They're the oldest anti-displacement grassroots organization in LA. A lot of people don't say that, I always do. They have massive amount, like in Koreatown right now, there's 43 developer projects in process, all displacement projects. Have little to do with the people that actually make up the community. Kenny, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. Yeah, like Taiji said, we are a all-volunteer, multi-ethnic, intergenerational organization based in LA Chinatown. Our focus is really on building grassroots power. So our vision of organizing is to really give people the tools and give people the space to empower and help each other, right? So we don't see ourselves as a service organization, but rather grassroots organizing. So a little bit about the Chinatown landscape. A lot of people might not realize, despite the growth of other Asian American communities, like in the San Gabriel Valley, Chinatown is still really a landing point for Asian immigrants. The neighborhood's made up predominantly of multilingual immigrants, including Latinx folks, numerous Chinese and Chinese minorities, as well as Southeast Asian populations, Vietnamese Americans, and Cambodian folks. Actually very similar to K-Town, the majority of this community is renters. 94% of Chinatown are renters, right? We also have a very high number of seniors compared to the rest of LA. And Chinatown, I guess, to sum up a very complex history of development in the neighborhood, there's a lot of rise in privatization, speculative investments in Chinatown, real estate developments, especially around the downtown LA area, right? So that really marks Chinatown as a prime target for large market rate developments and gentrification. So like Taiji said, there are about 40 that we know of planned and upcoming commercial, residential, and mixed-use developments. Maybe at the end we brought some kind of photos of the renderings and y'all can take a look at those. Market rate meaning luxury residential units, like Arturo said, studio for some of these goes for about $2,000, right? The median income in Chinatown compared to the rest of Los Angeles is quite stark. So the income ranges from $18,000 to $20,000. That's the second lowest area income in LA, right? So because of this, folks are facing a lot of challenges. They're vulnerable to market rate pressures, new landlords. People are buying buildings, raising rents by as high as 30 to 50%, right? And even tenants who have rent control units, they're harassed into leaving so that their landlords can raise the rents once those units are vacated, right? We're also facing a lot of loss of community and public resources, things like supermarkets, health services. Chinatown doesn't have a laundromat. And your new businesses tend to be coffee shops, hip restaurants, art stores, right? So in response to a lot of this, we organize, right? We talk to residents, we ask them to join us, we ask them to come join together with other residents to come up with solutions for these housing and community issues. A big focus is, empowering each other, helping each other speak up, and really take ownership over the issues that folks are facing. We hold landlords accountable, whether it's demanding that they improve habitability conditions, freeze or lower rents, or treat their tenants with respect. And a lot of our focus is really going door to door and building relationships with each other, right? I don't have time to go through our entire platform, but I do want to highlight some things. These are our platform of demands. One is the rent is too damn high, right? We have to we must repeal Costa-Hawkins to expand rent control in buildings built after 1995. The majority of residents in Chinatown are rent burdened, meaning that they spend 30% or more of their income on rent. Now the repeal would open up further possibilities of rent control, which only covers buildings built before 1978. Also, we do not need these new market rate developments that threaten to displace existing residents, right? And I want to emphasize that even though rent control is really important, it's only one step of many necessary ones, right? Like Taiji was talking about some of the ideal solutions, so we're kind of thinking about it as well. We have to protect existing senior and affordable housing from privatization and rising rents. Even under rent control, rents can go up by 3%. And if you're a senior on fixed Social Security income, your Social Security is not going up, alongside your rent. So for folks who are on fixed income, they have to decide they have to decide whether they want to spend less on food and groceries and essentials or pay their rising rents, right? And I'm trying to finish up right now. I want to go for that pocky stick. So we've talked a lot about I've talked a lot about landlords and developers, keeping them accountable, but at the same time, CCD really wants to continue holding our politicians, in particular our city councilors, Councilmember Cedillo, in particular, LA government officials. They have to engage with community in planning the future of the city and must work with residents, tenants, and not just real estate developers in planning the future of LA Chinatown, okay? We have to ensure that Chinatown residents actually have a say in community planning. So 2 things, yes on 10. Please vote on yes on 10 to repeal Costa-Hawkins. We started to talk to residents about this. In addition, we are also talking about, we're part of a coalition of Chinatown organizations doing a petition on which would call for a moratorium on all new developments in Chinatown until community input is actually being given. And I think I think Francis has the petitions and other CCD members have the petitions in the room, so please come see us afterwards. We really just want to make sure that the city actually gets to participate in the planning process. That's all the time I have. Come talk to us afterwards. We have materials. Yeah, thank you so much.
That's really a cool presentation. I was at one of their rallies at West LA. They're protesting better housing. Y'all won that, right?
It's complicated. We'll talk about that.
Well, no, they're doing a great job. And around the nation, I was reading, in fact, the last night, there's like 1 million evictions. I didn't know there's 1 million evictions across the nation. And then they're saying that there's about tens of thousands of new housing built each year. And I'm one of those Asian people that not too good at math, Now I was thinking, let's see, tens of thousands of units built each year, and there's 1 million evictions. I was thinking, well, that doesn't sound right, because year after year after year, it means like we're not going to be winning, So I think that the great work needs to go on, but in the future, maybe something like, check out Vienna. They have 62% social housing, 62%. Yeah, 62%. Now, way back, they had a little system change thing going on, Way back right around World War I, they called it Red Vienna. And I don't think it was like the Republican red, And anyway, after that, they got all this social housing. It's still going on to today, so it's really good to check that out.